Welcome to Sunday School. We are in Biblical Foundation for the Family. We're talking about parenting. And we're in this section, and again, understand this section will not work well. The section on discipline will not work well if we have not got the rest of our information digested and applied in our lives about loving our kids and understanding they're a gift from God and understanding that they're our responsibility as stewards of God, what God has given us, and that we're teaching them, that we're training them, that we're bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But as we get into discipline, we have to talk about the use of the rod, biblically, the use of spanking. I want to read a few paragraphs out of a book, Don't Make Me Count to Three. It's a fun title, but it's a helpful book in the way that it walks us through parental training of our children. And understand, this is page 99, so she's been going 98 pages so far on training her children. And now the title of this paragraph, or this chapter, is "The Tailbone is Connected to the Heart?" ? And sometimes I don't think we quite get that. But she says, many parents today are perplexed over the issue of whether or not to spank their children. Some say that it is cruel and abusive form of punishment. Or, so that's number one, cruel and abusive, or that it promotes violence. And we've all heard people say that. Others simply say that they don't believe in spanking. Even some well-respected Christian child psychologists advise against spanking. It's easy to become confused. Let's look at the arguments first. The first two, that it's cruel and abusive and that it promotes violence, may have some validity. Certainly there are homes where the parents spanked and the child grew up with a bent towards violence. However, in most of these cases, the parents had embraced a worldly form of spanking rather than the biblical form of chastisement, of correction. They had used the rod without reproof. They hadn't warned, they hadn't corrected, they hadn't trained. They had punished the wrong without explaining the right. Most often they had punished in anger with a wrong motive. And we've talked about all of these things. You know, you're inconveniencing me. I don't like it. You embarrass me. Those types of things. Anytime parents reject God's methods and embrace worldly methods, problems will result. Proverbs 14:12 tells us, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to destruction. In these cases, it would have been better for the parents to refrain from spanking altogether than to administer spanking in a way that rejected God's holy intention for discipline. The use of the rod, according to godly principles, is clearly taught in the Scriptures, as we shall see in the next sections. To say, I don't believe in spanking, is to say that God's ordained methods for child training are wrong. It is to reject God's word. It is to say that you are wiser than God himself. God's ways are higher than our ways. And so it's a very helpful, gracious parenting book. That's helpful. Don't Make Me Count to Three. We're also, much of the information that we're going through is actually developed in the heart of anger. This is primarily aimed at an angry child and causes that might be there. But it's wrapped around this whole idea of training your child and training them not to be angry. And part of that process is the discipline process. Lou Priolo wrote Heart of Anger. He's also written Teach Them Diligently, which is more the teaching side that we've covered already. Other books that we've talked about are Shepherding a Child's Heart, that covers some of this, and then Age of Opportunity, that covers some of this primarily for teenage years. And some of the things that, as you think about it, if we have not been carefully applying the rod in younger years and we try to start when the kid's a teen, it's probably too late. There are other forms of pain, I'll put it that way, that would be painful for the teen, that would be circumstantial pain that come on the child, that we may use instead. But those are books that I'll let them stand on their own, and you can read them. Where we've been the last few weeks, this is the third week on this. But we talked about wrong ideas of discipline, and I won't take a lot of time to review that, but we covered a little of that in just the paragraphs I just read. Often they've said, I tried that once. Well, they may have been angry when they did it. They may not have been training their children properly to begin with, and then you spank them for something your child doesn't even understand, and they go, huh, what just happened? I don't even understand what happened. And we never want that to be true of our discipline process. It was interesting, Kristen's teaching downstairs, but she had mentioned there a couple weeks ago that she said she was never surprised when she got a spanking, which actually was a little bit of encouragement to me years later to understand that she actually knew what was expected and knew that she was going against what was expected, and had been warned, had been explained, here's what's going to happen if, and then when the spanking came, she said, I knew that was coming. So part of that all comes together. We also talked about our right attitude as parents. The Lord corrects us because he loves us. So because we love our children, we want to correct them. We talked about God's way being best, that God talks about the use of the rod. And in our circumstances, a good way to see the rod is that of a small wooden spoon that would sting but not do damage to the child. It's not that you're beating him to kill him, to hurt him. It's that you're spanking them, making enough pain so that they know that maybe I don't want to do that again. We talked about the goal being correction, not punishment. So many parents, they might not say this, but in their minds, you're going to pay for that, for what you just did. And they make the child pay. And remember, our view of that is that Jesus paid for our sins. And Jesus paid for our child's sins. And the person that our children need to answer to is Jesus himself, and let him pay for their sins. We are going to correct them. We want to change their way of thinking and change their motives and change their actions through this training process. That's our goal, is correction, leading towards the future, looking ahead. Rather than looking back at what you did wrong, we're looking ahead at here's how we want you to live in the future. It takes a lot of communication. We talked about that last week. Plan ahead, figure out what the rules are, figure out what's going to happen if, how are we going to train the child to do this particular thing or to not do this particular thing, and you're talking it through and you're planning it through. You're having to think ahead. Any questions or comments so far before we pick up from there? So the third main point that we'll pick up with today is parents have to include the necessary ingredients for effective discipline. The necessary ingredients for effective discipline. You ever eat somebody else's, well, I'll just do this one. We had a chef attend church here for quite a while. And he would eat potato salad here. He says, this is really good. What do you put in it? Oh, we use Miracle Whip. I always use mayonnaise. And he'd say that every single time. Mm-hmm. This is really good. What do you put in it? Well, we use Miracle Whip. Well, I use and sometimes we use the wrong ingredients in our discipline process. The first ingredient is that the parent has to have some convictions. We have to have some ideas about life, and we hold them firmly. And the first is that children are actually a gift from God. Children are a heritage or a gift of the Lord Psalm 127:3 says. It's a good gift. Why would a child as bad as mine is right now be a gift to me? Why would we say that? Well, part of it is God gives them to us, gives children to parents to grow the parent. There's probably as much spiritual growth that happens in the parent as there is in the child. When the child comes, the child is a gift. And then we can actually develop those children into being a gift, a blessing to others. Second conviction would be that parents are God's representatives. We are God's stewards. We'll someday give an account for how we parented our children. And we talked about this even last week about 2 Corinthians 5:10. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each may be recompensed for his deeds according to what he's done, good or bad. We have to answer to God for how we have parented. A third conviction is that God will give us wisdom. God will give parents the wisdom and guidance through his word. We don't necessarily need, although we can learn from the way that secular child experts tell us how to do things. And just one came up just last week. Why did you do that? Well, no, you ask, what did you do? So that would come even from a non-believing child trainer, where we can get wisdom from that. But the primary wisdom we need is from God's word. If you lack wisdom, ask God, James 1 says. God has given us, it's a 2 Peter 1, God has given us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. Through knowing Jesus, we have the wisdom that we need. A fourth conviction is that it's loving to give limits. It's not necessarily loving to let your child do everything they want to do, to give them everything they want. Placing limits doesn't hurt them, and it doesn't necessarily help them. And I say, Pastor, what do you mean by that? Limits often reveal the need for more teaching. And well, Betsy had a little story on the way home Friday. Don't unplug the vacuum. Yeah, under 2 years old. Don't unplug the vacuum. And what does the child do? He goes over to try to, don't unplug the vacuum. Unplugging the vacuum won't necessarily hurt the child, but it might. So Sophia says, yeah, I did that once and it really stung. Oh, okay, so you got your finger in there wrong. So placing that fence around the plug on the vacuum didn't necessarily hurt the child, but it didn't necessarily protect the child. There was both sides possible there, but it did reveal a need for more training. And one of the things is sometimes we place limits just because they can't do everything. It's not healthy to just do everything. If a child can't not unplug the vacuum right now, what other limits will they push in the future? There's just so much about that. Any comments on that? So understand, maybe I'll use a different illustration. If I lock my teenage son in his room, that won't solve a sexual sin that my teenage son is going through. You understand that? That fence won't solve that problem. But neither will it cause sexual sin. The sexual sin, if it's there, he's wrestling with it, he's struggling with it. And my fence isn't going to cause it or fix it, but it's going to give opportunity for further training. You see what I'm trying to say there? So part of life, and this kind of coming in here, yeah. Part of the life is allowing a young child or a young person to learn from their mistakes, but you'll probably want to be wise in the mistakes you allow them to make. One thing that I think we try to apply is I would rather have my child doing foolish things while I can see it and correct it and help them through it than to put them in such a tight box now that when they get let out of their cage, you might say, figuratively speaking, they go and make these foolish decisions later with nobody there to help them. These are things that we would pick up our children, say, from soccer practice, and on that 5-minute ride home, you could have some great conversations about what could you have done differently, what was right about that decision, what was wrong about that decision, what will you do next time, those types of things. Any comments on, yeah, Joe?
The vacuum cleaner cord, like you said, if you set limits on don't unplug the vacuum, then, and they can't obey that, then, there's gonna be other things that they're not gonna obey. It just got me thinking about so many times, people who don't understand proper child training. If you tell your child, no, we're not gonna have a cookie right now, and they go and they sneak one, and people say, you punish them for taking the cookie. It's a cookie. No, it's disobedience. And getting them to understand that it's not unplugging the vacuum cleaner or taking the cookie that's the problem. The problem is you disobeyed what I told you.
Yes, right. Yeah, the problem isn't the action itself. The problem is the disobedience. Good, very good point. So examples of limits that each child will face in their lifetime. What are some examples of some of those limits that they'll face once they leave home, say?
Repeat.
So we're putting limits on the child. We're putting fences around the child. What are some examples of limits that they will face after they leave home? Jeff? Oh, you're driving. You got rules to follow. Very good. Yeah. Others?
Still can't have that cookie if you can't pay for it.
Sure. Yeah. If you can't pay for the cookie, it doesn't belong to you. You can't have it. Good.
Restrictions.
Employment restrictions. Okay, so this is not off to the side, but kind of off to the side. The project out back is going very slowly, primarily because they can't keep help, because the help don't want to follow instructions. And when the help don't follow instructions, they don't have a job anymore. And that means there's nobody working. So then they hire more, and then they don't follow instructions. Good. Okay, others. What about this? Gender. How many people want to get outside of the box of their gender? What about, say, a sleep-wake cycle? Some people try to live with really erratic sleep, and they can't figure out why they're sick or why they're angry or why they can't get anything done, and it's because they're not following God's pattern for you sleep and then you work and then you sleep and then you work. Your abilities. Well, I think I can be a pilot. Well, no, probably not. I can't see that well. So there's a lot of things like that affect, our abilities affect who we can be. And when the world tells you, you can be anything you want to be, well, probably not. Probably not. So teaching our children boundaries, fences, is actually a loving thing to do for them, to teach them how to live within those boundaries. Anything else with that, Beth?
Just that we all have to tell our bodies no, or yes, we need to exercise, or no, we don't need to eat this today, and if we can help them at an early age, start learning to say that no is a good word.
Okay, no is a good word, not necessarily a bad word. Okay, the next question, interaction there is how would you make a decision as a parent about what kind of mistake to allow your child to make? What are you going to allow your child to get in trouble about? How would you determine what mistakes to allow your child to make?
Maybe if he didn't study for that test, then he has to accept the poor grade.
Okay, so we're kind of following, say, our children's grades through school, and we know they have a test tomorrow, and we know they're out with the boys tonight and not studying, and we know that that child may actually fail this test. But not just fail the test, they may actually fail the whole class. Will we allow them to make that mistake? And sometimes there are lifelong lessons that a child learns by being allowed to make that jump.
I mean, it does say what criteria could a parent use
Yeah.
for what kind of mistake. So who is it going to affect? Is it going to affect
Okay.
the child, or is it going to affect other people? Is it going to inconvenience them? Is it going to injure them? Is it going to, is that something that could be life-threatening, or is it just going to hurt?
Okay.
Stupid should hurt.
Great. Okay, so is it going to affect just the child, or is it going to affect everybody else? And if it's going to affect everybody else, is everybody else in the place where they are willing to go through that for the growth of their sibling or something like that? And then who's it going to hurt? And then how badly is it going to hurt them? Is it going to be a permanent injury, or is it going to be... And sometimes with unplugging a vacuum, you don't know if that's going to be... If you hit 110 just wrong, it can be deadly. But often it's, boy, that gave me a little jolt. So which is it going to be? Sometimes you don't know, so you go a little bit on the error of caution. But those great questions. Other questions, criteria that we could ask. So who's it going to hurt? How badly is it going to hurt? Is it going to hurt them just for a semester of redoing a class? Yeah.
Well, oftentimes, I think allowing your child a foolish decision does hurt you, it inconveniences you
Yes.
because you're having to follow
Right.
through.
Right. But at some point, we're going to have to decide how to make sure our child understands how much their actions affected somebody else, how much it hurt somebody else, and to actually care about that. How many of us have sat in class until one of you admits to this thing that just happened? You're all going to sit there. Well, if the whole class knows who just did it, the whole class is either going to say, we're going to protect that person, or we're going to tattle on that person. And sometimes that's hard as a family. Joe,
Way back, one of the lessons that I learned in that exact scenario, I don't even know how old I was, but my mother was visiting the neighborhood lady, and she had a towel wrapped on the end of her cupboard, and I grabbed it, and I tried to pull myself up and broke it off. Well, unfortunately, my father-in-law took it off, brought it home, welded it, but he made me go with it.
Mhm.
And I remember feeling so bad that he had to do that.
Yeah.
And that I had to face her with the broken thing that my dad had to fix. And, that really taught me to respect
Yes.
other people's stuff.
So to actually, even if you're unable to do the fixing yourself, to stand next to somebody while they're trying to fix it. Sometimes you're trying to watch your parents fix your relational problems. that you caused, and you say, whoa, I don't want to do that again. So it's a great lesson. Good. Okay, well, let's move on. So those are some of the convictions you have. Children are a gift. They're our responsibility. It's a loving thing to give them limits. The second point here, not only does a parent have to have convictions, the parent needs to give attention to the rules which are to be used for this correction and guidance. What rules are we expecting our children to follow? So parents, you need to be careful about how you make these rules. Rules should be reasonable. God's commands to us are reasonable. This is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. His commandments are not burdensome. And sometimes I think we as parents give our children just rules that don't make any sense, and they're not reasonable to begin with. Okay, so don't unplug the vacuum, but if we say don't touch anything in this whole house and you tell a 2-year-old that's not going to happen. That's not reasonable, Dick.
An ingredient that I feel is extremely important, and that is consistency as well, because if we set the rules, and
Sure.
then one time we let them do it, and we don't say anything, the next time we don't.
Absolutely. Consistency in how you follow the own rules you've set. So they need to be reasonable. They should be definable. Go clean your room. What does that mean? What does that mean for a 2-year-old, for a 5-year-old, for a parent? And never are the definitions the same. So you've got to define what that means so your child knows what you mean by how to clean their room. And this could be any of the instructions you give. You say clean your room, and they clean the room to their specifications, and then you tell them they didn't clean the room. They're confused. They're actually angry at you. I did clean my room. Dad, I did. I did mow the lawn. Well, you mowed with these riches in between, but so make sure you define clearly, so the rules have to be definable. We could probably give a lot more illustrations of that. Enforceable. Enforceable rules. Go to your room, you're grounded for life. That's really going to happen, isn't it? But when we say things like that, when we make rules like that, the child doesn't know which rules are followable. I can't even follow that rule, and mom and dad aren't even going to make me follow that rule. So what rule should I follow? Don't ever talk that way again. Well, what way? So you talk through, here's what you said, here's why it was wrong, here's why we don't talk that way to people. Sit in that chair and don't move until I come back. Well, there's wiggles and all of that happens. So make sure they're enforceable. So you could say something like, please sit in that chair until I come back. That is enforceable, but don't move is a different thing. Okay, third point here is parents need to establish appropriate rewards and corrections as part of the discipline process. Cause and effect. There are rewards for doing a job well. That doesn't mean we have to give the child candy every time or something like that, but the benefit might be, I know I've pleased my mom by doing that, and that can be a reward. What are some cases in the Bible, specific examples in the Bible, where God describes cause and effect? Do this or else, or don't do this or else. Can you think of any?
Well, a big one is death, or we accept and live a life for the Lord.
Okay, so death or life.
Crazy.
Okay.
I mean, the Israelites over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Us
Okay.
too,
Okay. So
but
the Israelites
just follow the
would
word of
disobey a specific command of God, would fall away from God, would fall into slavery. They would beg God for help. God would give them a deliverer. They would be delivered. They'd fall in. Good. Joe.
Absolutely.
Okay? Okay. Okay, here's the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat it. If you eat it, you will surely die. Okay, good. Don't work, don't eat. There's short-term daily things. There are longer-term things as well. Yes?
I don't know if this is one, but honor your father and mother that your day may be long on the land.
Honor your father and mother that your days may be long upon the land. I don't know if we make a big deal about that like we should. That whose life is shortened because. And it doesn't mean that if somebody dies early, they obviously weren't honoring father and mother. That wasn't the point. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of those cause and effect type of things in the Bible. So don't feel bad as a parent saying, if we get our rooms cleaned to dad's specs or mom's specs, then we get to go and do this. If we don't get it cleaned to mom's or dad's specs, then this is what the result's going to be. Don't feel bad about doing cause and effect. If you forget your sneakers, dad's not going to come bring them to you. And that means you're probably not going to do gym class today. So remember your stuff. Yeah, so cause and effect. Second thing here is consider the following observations regarding cause and effect. So one observation is it's more immediate for small children. So Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. If you're not attaching the results, the negative results quickly to evil, they learn to do evil. And our modern justice system or injustice system, I think, contributes to this. Now, we want a fair trial, but we want a timely trial. I think the way it says is a speedy trial is the word used. Why? Because we want to tie the injustice to the pain that is suffered because of it. And when you stretch it out for years, it just isn't tied together, especially with a young child. A young child, 15 minutes later, it's way too late. 5 minutes later, it may be too late.
First 5 to 20 seconds.
Yeah, it's
2 to 3 seconds.
we're talking seconds. Here's what you did. Here's the result of that. Good.
Even in, like, with autistic children that
Sure.
we train.
Sure. Even
They
older
The
children.
behavior now, you have to
Yeah.
correct within the first 5 seconds
Yeah.
of their, that's.
And we adults, I think, learn better that way too. I mean, we don't want somebody jumping down our throats all the time, but
I loved using cause and effect. In the summer, I would have a list of things that needed to be accomplished that day. And then I'd say if these all things got done, then we'd go swimming.
Sure.
And that was a
yeah.
great.
So cause and effect. Here's the list of stuff we need to do. Once that's done, we can go swimming. And sometimes they went swimming at 10 in the morning because it was all done. And that was the reward. That was the effect of doing what they want, what was expected. Second observation is this is focused on a daily habit that needs to be changed. Nobody, no child, no adult can change 10 things at once. Ask your spouse to change 10 things all at the same time. Have your spouse ask you to change 10 things at the same time. In my notes, I say select 2 or 3 areas, maybe 1 or 2. Maybe 1 or 2. Work on 1 or 2. And just focus your attention. And often, for a young child especially, maybe a week, and you'll generally get it. Now, you'll have to recheck. You have to keep up on it. Consistency. But it's amazing if you take a week on 1 or 2 things, then you can move on to the next 1 or 2 things. So try working at it that way. Important, a little note here, even in the use of cause and effect, A child's focus must be drawn to pleasing God by being like Jesus. There are a variety of motives presented in Scripture, like the blessings for obedience, that you may live long on the earth, like honor your father and mother. Discipline for disobedience is a motive. Rewards or loss of rewards at the judgment seat of Christ. But each motivation eventually points to the glory of God and the work of Jesus Christ as the Son of God. If we teach our children to be perfect little angels and they miss Jesus, we've missed the point. So make sure Jesus is the one who's focused. And then you can do that often by saying, I saw what your brother did to you. You were very kind and patient with them. I think Jesus was pleased with you. So you can reward behavior by pointing out that they did it for Jesus and they looked like Jesus in doing it. Letter D, A was under necessary ingredients for effective discipline, was have some convictions. Letter B was be careful about the rules that you give, that they're reasonable and definable and enforceable. And then use appropriate rewards and corrections as cause and effect. That we're going to go swimming if, or we're not going to be able to go swimming if you don't. But letter D, parents must follow through in love as correction is carried out. So that not only consistency in following the rules that you set, but make sure you're doing it in love, following through in love. So number one, teach the child to ask forgiveness. Don't just say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry as an emotion, but teach them how to seek forgiveness. This is a totally different topic all on its own, but something like, I was wrong for saying that you looked like a pig. That was unkind of me. So what did I do? I said you looked like a pig. Why was that wrong? It was unkind. So please forgive me. So you're teaching them to label sin the way the Bible labels sin, and then to ask for forgiveness. Number two, reassure the child of your love for them and your commitment to help them to be pleasing to God. Daddy really wants you to please God. I want to help you to please God. I don't want you to be a fool, and I know you don't want to be a fool, so let me help you with that. I love you too much to allow you to get away with this. Number three, give them help and assistance where needed. Sometimes a warning. Don't overuse it. Don't warn them every 5 minutes for 3 days. But sometimes a warning, you're acting right on the edge of foolishness right now. I know you don't want to be a fool. And I know you don't want the results of the correction. So it's just a warning. And often that's a teaching tool. And often with your children, that's all that's needed. But again, if all you give them is warnings with no results ever, then you're training them that they will never get results ever. So cause and effects. Number four, remember that your actions speak louder than your words. 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one look down on your youth, but rather in speech and conduct, in love and faith and purity, show yourself an example of those who believe. Show people what believers act like through your own example. And I think this is true of our parenting as well. Final things there. I want to make sure we have enough time to actually go through and give some very practical illustrations of the suggested steps when spanking, and then on the back side of that sheet, the abbreviated plan for child rearing. We'll be reviewing really a lot of the stuff we've been talking about as we put this into practice. So next week, we will go through basically just a scenario about the steps to take if we feel like it's time for a spanking. Any other comments?
May I ask yours and Betsy's take on the 1, 2, 3?
We have used 1, 2, 3. never 1, 2.5, 1, 2, 2.5. If we're threats without consistent follow-through are not a threat at all. You're training them to do the opposite. So yeah, that is a form of a warning. If you find yourself doing 1, 2, 3 all the time, now we're going to have to say, okay, let's go in the long-term thought process. How am I going to train my child that delayed obedience is disobedience? How am I going to train them about that? And then I'm going to have to come up with a plan. Or Betsy and I are going to have to come up with a plan about how to train them with that. But once in a while, it's, okay, so the child obviously needs a warning. I don't really want to spank them right at this moment. And I don't think they are aiming for a spanking. They're just not thinking. So 1, 2, and oh, okay, yeah, it's time. So that would be a form of a warning. Good. Others?
Under 2, I would.
Yeah, probably the little ones.
Well, you, like,
Yeah.
for instance, for Nathan, I said, I just told him no, ow, because he went to reach. And he looked at me. He actually didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I said, good job. I said, if you do it again, Grammy's going to have to thank you. He never went near the board.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So
but then there's
a clear explanation and expectation, and then you watch them, and they're looking at you with those eyes, and you
Yes.
just know, did they mean it or did they not mean it?
and I'm Grammy, and my boy, he's like, oh, I better listen to her, 'cause
Okay.
I'm not someone that cares for him every day.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your input. We'll pray.